Okay, so lingua franca, huh? We're really going to deep dive into this. You've got a whole stack of articles here. So clearly it's more than just a passing interest.
Indeed, indeed. It's one of those things, seems simple on the surface, but the history of it, how it plays out in the world today, that's what I find really
I'll
fascinating.
be honest, I think I kind of take it for granted. Like it's
Yeah.
just there.
Right.
But this article you sent from what was it?
Lingualud.
Lingualid, right.
Yeah.
They give a pretty clear definition. If a group of people speaks different languages but uses one to communicate, that's their lingua franca.
Which, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Gets right to that core function,
But it's
overcoming the barriers of language.
so back in the day, like when folks were doing trade and stuff, that was essential. Oh, absolutely. Think about those early trade routes, the Silk Road, people speaking dozens of languages. Gotta have some way to make deals.
This article, though, it mentioned Charlemagne and the Frankish Empire. Something about Frankish language.
Ah, yes. Now that's getting into the historical significance. See, the term lingua franca itself comes from that period.
Get out! I did not know that.
It's true. The language spoken in Charlemagne's empire, what we now call the Frankish language, that became a lingua franca for much of Europe.
Okay, but was that just because of, like, merchants and stuff, or?
It was a factor, sure, but we're also talking about political power. Charlemagne's empire was vast, and having a common language helped solidify his rule.
So it's not just about making conversation easier. It's about who has the influence.
Right. Precisely. And that's where things get, well, complicated. The article uses this term linguistic imperialism.
Ooh, yeah, that sounds kind of ominous.
It can be, because when one language becomes dominant, it can have a real impact on other languages and cultures.
Hold on, hold on. So you're saying that back then, the Frankish language, it might have actually pushed out other ways of speaking.
It's a possibility we have to consider. But to understand that dynamic fully, we should probably unpack what the article said about pidgin languages, because that's a whole other...
Oh, right, right. They made a distinction there, didn't they? Pidgin is more like, what? When people are kind of thrown together and have to invent a way to communicate.
Exactly. Often in isolated communities or very specific contexts. Whereas a lingua franca, like that Frankish language, it had this broader reach tied
So,
into...
political power.
Exactly. And trade, of course. The article gave the example of the Mediterranean, right? Melting pot of languages, Italian, French, Arabic. That whole region needed a way to communicate.
So it makes sense. A lingua franca would pop up in
Yeah.
a place like that. But knowing what we do now about this whole linguistic imperialism thing, I mean, was that happening back then too
Mm.
with the Frankish language? I guess what I'm wondering is, did it have a negative impact back then? I mean, obviously languages change over time, but
Right, right. It's easy to look back and say, well, that's just how it was. But yeah, there might have been consequences. This article doesn't really go into detail on that, though.
well, bummer. I'm curious now, although this whole idea about languages being overshadowed, it made me think about something else the article mentioned. Pop culture.
Ah, yes.
Because if everybody's watching the same movies, listening to the same music, because of this shared language, doesn't that kind of make everything the same? Culturally speaking, I mean.
That's a common concern for sure. Especially in our globalized world. The article did use the word homogenization, which,
Yeah.
yeah, not ideal.
So we're all going to end up listening to the same stuff. No more like discovering cool music from other countries.
I wouldn't go that far. It's not quite so doom and gloom, I don't think. Language, even when it's a lingua franca, it can also be a bridge between cultures.
A bridge.
Sure. Think about it. One culture influences another, they blend a bit, new things pop up. It's not just a one-way street.
Okay, so more like a two-way exchange then. Can you give me an example? I'm kind of stuck on this whole sameness thing.
Absolutely. Look at K-pop. It originated in Korea, obviously, but now it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Breaking language barriers, people all over the world love it.
That's true. I actually have a friend who's super into K-pop.
Yeah.
Never thought about it that way, though.
It's a great example of how a lingua franca, in K-pop's case, probably English to some extent, can actually help spread a culture, not just wipe it out.
Whoa. Mind blown. So then,
Eh.
hold on. This is going to sound like a dumb question, but
Go for it.
if a shared language is so powerful, why bother learning other languages? Why not just, like, everyone learn English and be done with it?
Ah, now that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something the Lingualit article emphasizes, too. Learning languages is still important.
They did make a big deal about that, didn't they?
Yeah.
But why, if we've already got a lingua franca?
Because language, it's about so much more than just the words themselves. It's about how we see the world, how we think, how we solve problems, even how we feel things. Knowing multiple languages, it gives you this flexibility, this richness.
So, like, If I learn, say, French or something, I'm going to start thinking differently.
You might be surprised. At the very least, you'll gain a whole new perspective. And the article talked about cognitive benefits too, like better memory and problem solving.
Yeah, I remember that. It's like good exercise for your brain, right? So even if we have a lingua franca, making things easier in some ways, learning languages is still super valuable. Man, there's so much to think about here.
Yeah.
And it all started with just trying to figure out what lingua franca even means.
That's the beauty of it, though, isn't it? This one concept. It spirals out into history, culture, politics, even brain science.
So where do we go from here? Is English going to be the lingua franca forever, or?
That's a big question, right? And honestly, it's tough to say. I mean, if history's taught us anything, it's that language is constantly in flux. There are so many factors at play.
Not just how many people speak it then.
Right. Think back to the Frankish language. It spread, sure, because lots of people spoke it, but also because of the Frankish Empire's power.
Yeah.
Politics, economics, even just cultural influence, those all matter.
So for a language to, like, take over, it's got to be more than just the words themselves.
Exactly. It's connected to all these bigger forces, which is why when we're looking at what might challenge English down the line, it's not as simple as counting speakers.
The article mentioned Mandarin and Spanish.
They're definitely contenders. Growing economies, large populations. But there's another wild card, technology.
Ooh, right. Like what if, I don't know, universal translators become a thing? We wouldn't even need a lingua franca then, would we?
Precisely. Imagine no more language barriers. It'd be a whole new world. The whole concept of a lingua franca might become obsolete.
Oh, okay. That's kind of blowing my mind here. But, we've been talking about the downsides of one language being dominant. Maybe that future where everyone understands each other instantly, maybe that's not so bad.
It's an interesting thought, isn't it? Maybe the future isn't about one language winning, but about all of us being able to tap into the richness of multiple languages.
Man, from one simple term, lingua franca, look where we ended up. History, culture, the future of language itself.
That's what I love about these deep dives. You never know where they'll lead.
I've definitely got a lot to think about now. Thanks for taking me along on this one.
Anytime. Until next time.